English Humour, a deep dive into the depths of English language humour. Part 26, Double Acts. In this segment, I'll look at another overlooked feature of comedy, which is comedians that work together, either as double acts or trios or troupes. If we go through some famous double acts, you'll see how important they've been in comedy. Starting with Laurel and Hardy. There were others around, of course, Flanagan and Allen, another Allen, Gracie, with George Burns. Another example of a double act like Morecambe and Wise, where the original comedian was flipped to being the straight man. Then there was Abbott and Costello.
On the St. Louis team, we have who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
That's what I want to find out. I want you to tell me the names of the fellas on the St. Louis team.
I'm telling you, who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
Do you know the fellas' names?
Yes.
Well, then who's playing first?
Yes.
I mean the fellow's name on first base.
Who?
The fellow playing first base for St. Louis.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who is on first?
Well, what are you asking me for?
I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, who is on first?
I'm asking you who's on first.
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes.
Well, go ahead and tell me.
Who?
The guy on first.
Who?
The first baseman.
Who is on first?
Have you got a first baseman on first?
Certainly.
Then who's playing first?
Absolutely.
Now, Laurel and Hardy were known as Dick und Dorf in Germany, Fat One and Stupid One. And there's something of the dynamic of the comedy duo in there. One of them has to be stupid. You can get away with two being stupid, one being dumb and the other dumber, for example. You can get away with what the Jewish call a schlemazel and a schlemiel. The Yiddish saying says the schlemiel is someone who often spills his soup, and the schlemazel is the person it lands on. That could almost be expanded to Laurel and Hardy, Blackadder and Baldrick, where the supposedly clever one often comes off worse. Doesn't surprise me that we use the Jewish words. As we've already seen, there have been a panoply of fine Jewish comedians. The Three Stooges, the Marx Brothers, Jackie Mason, Lenny Bruce, Rodney Dangerfield, or moving into cinema, Woody Allen, Mel Brooks, and later on in television, Saturday Night Live territory, Jerry Seinfeld, Sarah Silverman, Larry David, Sacha Baron Cohen. But back to the double acts. Rat Pack boozer Dean Martin teamed up with Jerry Lewis, who was also Jewish, and they did a series of films that got a bit samey towards the end, but they went on for 10 years. Martin playing the straight man, Lewis hamming and mugging. John Lemon also made a film partnership with Lithuanian Jewish immigrant Walter Matthau. Lemon and Matthau are famous for playing off each other deliciously in films such as The Fortune Cookie, which was script written by Wilder and Diamond. And in 1968, Neil Simon screen-wrote his own 1965 play, The Odd Couple. And then there's my favourite, The Front Page, also based on a play, this time an earlier one, by Hecht and MacArthur from 1928. Directed by Billy Wilder, who we already know was Jewish. And there was the other Wilder, Gene Wilder, who worked with Richard Pryor. Gene Wilder was also Jewish. Their best stuff, in my opinion, is seen in Stir Crazy. Then you get famous Goyim performers, Bing Crosby and Bob Hope. And again, a cinematic career with the Road to movies. The Road to Morocco, etc. Very popular in their day. Perhaps of their time. Crosby wasn't a comedian initially, he was a singer, a crooner as they called them, but the team was successful. Bob Hope, the all-American comedian, lived to the age of 100. To continue with the double acts, there are the now almost forgotten Peabody and Browning, radio comedians of the 30s, unsuccessfully trying out various formats as the hippie years dawned. Bob and Ray, who started off with zany radio shows and spoofs, and ended up with quite urbane, word-based comedy. The Firesign Theatre used word-based and sound-based and LSD-based comedy to make their weird albums. They first appeared on November the 17th, 1966, performing live on Radio Free Oz, KPFK-FM. They had a lot of success putting out an album a year, more or less, And the LP called Waiting for the Electrician or Someone Like Him was a step forward, a kind of audio radio comedy drama, best experienced while tripping. They were playing with the format, just as Bob and Ray did the spoof radio interviews on the radio and the spoof TV interviews on the TV. Peter Bergman, the founder of the Fireside Theatre, was kicked off air from his school radio for announcing a communist takeover of the school. Being kicked off the radio almost seems to be a badge of honour. Morecambe and Wise we've already seen. Pete and Dud, as they were known, we've already seen. Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, but they had an alter ego. They had a Mr. Hyde to their Jekyll. They put out some surreptitious cassettes with some really quite unpleasant and filthy material on it under the names Derek and Clive. Now these things got passed around and passed about, and eventually they got translated into records, which you can still listen to if you have a strong stomach. Smith and Jones came up from Not the 9 O'Clock News. Newman and Baddiel played their sellout at the Wembley Arena. Newman and Baddiel had previously worked with Punt and Dennis in the Mary Whitehouse Experience, just to show how all these threads come together. Let's not forget the Cambridge Footlights, if we're talking about ensemble players and all the people they've spewed up over the years. Reeves and Mortimer were spattering TV comedy with surrealism. And while we're with the television, three of my favourites, John Bird and John Fortune, known as the Two Johns, also did a series on the television with Rory Bremner, the impressionist. Armstrong and Miller, a beautiful observation of our still class-riddled society, wrapped in surrealism. And Mitchell and Webb of Peep Show. And in this section, I'm going to make a brief run-through of another forgotten corner, which is musical comedy. Of course, it's difficult to make comedy just with music, although Spike Jones made a good attempt. So we normally rely on the lyrics. Gilbert and Sullivan, the very successful in their day comic opera writers and performers, responsible for the phrase short, sharp shock, that's your trivia for the day, awaiting the sensation of a short, sharp shock from a cheap and chippy chopper on a big black block. Gives you some idea of their lyrical style. Flanagan and Allen were plying their trade, as were Flanders and Swan in the late music hall. Some of their lyrics are nicely illustrative of the absurdities of English. Here are two classic elisions, where words which usually collocate with the same verb are separated in a comic fashion, as I'm sure you'll appreciate in this verse. She lowered her standards by raising her glass, her courage, her eyes, and his hope. Or, she made no reply, up her mind, and a dash for the door. And if you like that kind of clever wordplay in rhyme and song, who better than Noel Coward, and what better than Mad Dogs and Englishmen?
The natives grieve when the white men leave their huts, because they're obviously, definitely nuts. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. The Japanese don't care to, the Chinese wouldn't dare to. Hindus and Argentines sleep firmly from 12 to 1, but Englishmen detest our siesta.
A brief mention was made of the British folk scene as we talked about the variety circuit and working men's clubs. People who went to watch music would expect to be entertained. Some of the performers were natural comedians that extended the banter between their songs. Billy Connolly, the Big Yin, began as a folk singer. Mike Harding from Rochdale had some success with a comic song. And America's Tom Lehrer visited us on occasion, as we saw with TW3. One of his famous songs is The Elements, which manages to rhyme the periodic table to the tune of He is the very model of a modern Major General. Another of Gilbert and Sullivan's, from the Pirates of Penzance.
There's antimony, arsenic, aluminum, selenium, hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen and rhenium, and nickel, neodymium, neptunium, germanium, iron, americium, ruthenium, uranium, europium, zirconium, lutetium, vanadium, and lanthanum, and osmium, and astatine, and radium, and gold, actinium, and indium, and gallium, and iodine, and thorium, and thulium, and thallium.
Lehrer was more famous for his intellectual songs and his darker side. One of his albums includes Lobachevsky, which is about plagiarizing mathematicians. In fact, that was another one that came, like the Derek and Clive ones, got successful by word of mouth at the beginning. Self-published, not promoted, but he ended up making records and being quite successful on the concert tours, leading to his second album, An Evening Wasted with Tom Lehrer. A nice wry title to reflect his work. Well, he is the author of Poisoning Pigeons in the Park and Dead Puppies Ain't Much Fun. And so bringing us up to modernity, that's the turn of the century in our case, some more musical comedy. Freddie Starr wasn't a musical comedian and he wasn't well liked by a lot of comedians, but I challenge you to watch his skit of Starry Night without laughing. Monty Python were the Beatles of their time, or sometimes called the fifth Beatle. But who was the fifth Python? Was it comic songwriter Neil Innes? Or was it the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band? They were the ones that gave the musical interludes in the wonderfully surreal children's series, Do Not Adjust Your Set, that gave birth to some fledgling pythons, which also featured poetry by Ogden Nash. The rather fine comic actor Jack Black couldn't resist duetting, which he does so with Kyle Gass in the duo known as Tenacious D. Then there's Tim Minchin with his incredibly ingenious lyrics and skillful piano playing.
A couple of G's, an R and an E, an I and an N. Just 6 little letters, all jumbled together, have caused damage that we may never mend. That if these people should happen to choose to reclaim the word as their own, it doesn't mean the rest of you have a right to its use. Only a ginger can call another ginger ginger. Only a ginger can call another ginger ginger.
And Flight of the Conchords, who we know from a New Zealand TV series which showed us not only their songs but their day-to-day life. In fact, very similar to the band in Spinal Tap, the Rob Reiner film. But just a minute, so the Flight of the Conchords, do they exist or don't they? They seemed to, and then they did tours. But Spinal Tap was the name of a band that didn't exist but featured in a documentary. Yes, that's right. And the name for that is Mockumentary, which we'll look at next.